Hey everybody, this is On, and I would like to say I'm coming to you with this month's video. I don't know if it's going to be this month's completely or not, but I really wanted to get this cut because it is a little earlier in the month than I normally put something out. So who knows, maybe I'm going to sneak an extra video in here somewhere. But I just was really inspired this morning and really had something come up, and I've been having a lot of work that I've been doing around this topic with feelings and being able to feel into things, and it's part of the work that I personally am doing right now, and I know other people that are this all connects for right now. So I thought, you know what? I woke up this morning, I got that inspiration running through me, and let's just cut something. And if it turns out to be an extra video, great. If it's not an extra video, and maybe we have a longer space between the next one I do, that's okay too. So I always feel it's great to do things when you're in that moment and you're inspired and the ideas are fresh in your head. And, um, it's been so interesting because yesterday was the eclipse and I live in Maine. So it was not 100% in. We were about 99.5 or 99.8 or something like that here. We're just outside that total eclipse line, but it was amazing. And what was interesting was what I was doing a study session. Our new moon study session was going on, and at that same time, and we did this beautiful journey work and opening up this beautiful flow for our earth and the world and our own personal healing and things like that. So it's been amazing to watch what has opened up in less than 24 hours, literally, coming through in the shifts and the vibrations and the energy, which is great. I'm so excited about it. But for those of you who don't know my work, I just want to show you this really quick. And this is the Code Journey. I put out this book every single year. This is what the 2024 edition looks like. I'm working on 2025 right now. You can see it's a very thick book. You can see how that's, almost as thick as half of my index finger on there. So it's a lot of information there, but it's amazing because it doesn't matter how long you're on your path. I'm writing 2025 right now, so I'm actually tapping into what those influences will be like and what the energy patterns are. And so I write it a year in advance. And it's just so much fun to watch what comes to fruition that is correlating with what's in the book at the time. And I use my book every day. I write it and I still use it every day, because it's just such a lifesaver for giving me some foresight and understanding about things, and just staying on top of what's happening. It keeps me out of a lot of trouble. Um, God knows I need that. Maybe not so much as before, but definitely it's a good thing. So anyways, I have a study session twice a month, by the way, for that, which is usually on the new moon and the full moon. It's very rare that it's not on those days. And we meet, and so we did something different yesterday. We did this whole visualization experience to work with and be in alignment with the energy patterns that were present for our new moon and the solar eclipse and the energies that were happening, and to work with that energy so that we could really, again, bring the healing to ourselves, bring the healing into our world, and open up a lot of influences, clear a lot of things, embrace a lot of things. And part of what we did requires this aspect of feeling and feeling into things. And of course, we don't have that time to get it into the deep intensity of it, right? But we do have that time that to further things on our own and to delve into more things on our own. And it's just like I said, it's been amazing watching the interactions I've been having last night, this morning, just everything coming through in this different way, this shift of energy that's happening. But one of the things I've been working with lately is this aspect of feelings. And I think we, and by the way, this is probably going to be a longer video. I'm just giving you a heads up right now because there's a lot of information around this. So get comfy or whatever you need to do. If you have to come back to it, I understand that, or break it up, but hopefully it won't be overly long. Um, but definitely going to have some depth in this video. A lot of times we interact and interchange feelings and emotions, and they're really very different things, and they have a huge impact on our life. And I feel like this also opens some doors and understanding for me, because there's a lot of people out there right now, at least that I've been hearing from and connected to, that are very spiritual people, and they're going through really hard times. Now, I know part of this is our code patterns. We're in times where there is a lot of turbulence, and there's a lot of upheaval, and there's a lot of unexpected things happening, and there's a lot of shifts and changes and sudden twists and things. And there's a lot of people who are very sincere. They're very much heart-centered people. They're doing some incredible work in the world, and they're finding themselves in these survival situations, I think is maybe a good way to put it. I'm seeing a lot of spiritual people suddenly ending up homeless, or suddenly ending up not being able to work in any kind of regular job. So they're struggling to pay for the basics, like food, um, like a roof over their head, things like that. And it's been an interesting thing for me to observe. It's an interesting piece, and I've been, getting all of these normal little pieces here and there about things. But I do know in the codes it talks a lot about um, this component of past, present, and future. That is part of the cycles that we're in. And every in our personal lives, we have components where we cycle through something and we'll repeat oftentimes the same code pattern about every 9 years. But it's not exactly the same, because of what we choose to do in one cycle will impact the next time we go around it. So you really only have 7 core years each time around that are going to carry forward, because you always have one that is dropping off and not going to repeat, and you always have one that is um, coming in that you didn't have before. And then you have also the component that when we hit the year 2000, things shifted very dramatically for a lot of people. So they may have been going along in a favorable code cycle. Our world was in a more favorable code cycle at that time. But when 2000 hit, it thrust a lot of people into these more challenging components that deal with health things, and that deal with a lot of turbulence and weather related things. And it's not because of the environmental narratives or weather narratives or things that are out there. It is literally the energetic cycles that are happening that is having an impact on our weather patterns. And that's a very different thing than the earth being damaged and having issues. So they're very different patterns, is what I'm saying. They're coming from totally different places, and the narratives are rooted in greed and money and building up, certain groups of people, versus when you're dealing with energetic patterns that are upheaval and connected to weather. You can have a variety of things. There can be the power warfare involved in it, or you can also have um, aspects of where um, you have nature trying to balance itself, but just the energetic currents alone, outside of those things going on, makes things more unpredictable. So, and that's not just tied to weather. That's, brings up more drama, and it brings up everybody's trauma that they have been dealing with prior to the year, say 2000, and things. So we have a lot of different components that come into play. So when you really look at what kids have been born into and these energy patterns, and then we look at our personal patterns, and when the year 2000 hit, a lot of people shifted from these more favorable cycles. Not everybody. Some people, were in challenging patterns before, and then it shifted to favorable patterns for them. For a lot of people, and particularly it seems like a lot of spiritual people, and that's not necessarily connected to their spirituality. It's just, I think a lot of spiritual people are born under certain code cycles or code patterns, shall we say. And so, and I would say astrologers might even agree with that. My work isn't specifically astrology. It blends over 50 different modalities, none of which are used in the traditional ways. And so when this happens, and it's a language for me, really, understanding what these currents are and how they interact. So then what happens, it's very interesting because, like astrology, right? If you have people born under certain influences, certain planetary alignments, they tend to be more intuitive, or they tend to be more productive, or things like that. Well, the code patterns are very similar in that sense, that when you have people born at a certain time or under certain patterns, they're going to be in certain cycles at the same time. So we actually have a lot of spiritual people. And I think here again, a lot of spiritual people come in and they think, wow, I'm here, I'm just going to shine my light, everything's going to be rosy. And a lot of them weren't geared for the challenges. They just weren't ready to realize that being in their spirituality meant dealing with all these challenging circumstances. And probably if our soul self knows ahead of time, then it's like it signs up and it's like, yes, I'm there, I'll do it, happy to do it. And then we have another component of the collective energy, which is really looking at this aspect that we have things happening in this world. So we need the soul energy to come in and to work and to transform or to transmute or to purify these challenges in the world. And that's where we're kind of at. And that's why we have so many people coming into, whether it's a religious belief or spiritual belief or any of that, here to help to transform that energy. It takes a lot of souls, a lot of beings, to transform where the world is at right now. So this, it's just kind of some prelude to what I'm getting into with this topic. But a lot of times we think that because we're doing a certain technique or a certain practice, that just the action of doing that is enough, or just saying some words is enough. People think, well, I can do this spell, right? You got that whole community, and I just do the spell, and if I light the candle and I say these words, it's done. But it's not done, actually. It only has a very small impact if we are not feeling it in our heart, if we are not actually feeling the entire thing and being fully present with it. Then we actually are not moving through it. We're only doing that through action or through thought, but we're not actually doing it. And why here? Why the feeling part? Because when we get into that, that's the God energy. Um, that's the divine presence. That's the divine source energy. And if you are not rooted into that, we open up all kinds of stuff, and we don't actually have the impact. Think about it. When somebody says, hey, love you, I love you, and there's no meaning behind it, there's no feeling, you can tell they're not feeling it, they're just saying the words because they're dating you or whatever, they feel like they have to say it. But when you get somebody and they take you and they are present with you and they look you in the eyes and they come forward and they go, you know what, I really love you. And I really love how beautiful you are. And I really love how amazing you are and how your soul's, and you can see it, you can feel it from them. Right. So there's this difference, it's a difference between when somebody's sincere and when they're just saying something because they feel like they need to say it. It's part of like being where I am right now, the people that own it. How many times do you go and you stay someplace and people say, oh, if you need anything, just let us know. Right. But if you actually ask for what you need or want, they're like, it becomes a huge issue, right? So they didn't actually feel it. They didn't actually mean it. They didn't actually feel it. When I stay here, the owners here are amazing. And one of the things about them is because they actually feel it when they say that to you. They actually mean it when they say that to you. It's not just about your meeting your needs. We want you to really have a great experience. We really want you to be happy when you're here. We really want you to have what you want to have while you're here. And it is never an imposition for them. They get joy out of fulfilling that set of words. So they actually feel it within them. And see, this changes everything. This changes everything. And we have come in society to overlap and believe that feeling and emotions are the same thing. And feeling is not emotions. They're very different things. You think of people, we see it a lot, right? We see it a lot in our world. People are very emotional and they get very dramatic and very charged up, but they're not feeling it. Think of all these TikTokers and people, right? They're getting paid, right? They go out and videotape themselves being dramatic. They're just actors. They're not actually, doing those that, like, if they weren't being paid for that and they didn't have to videotape themselves doing that, they wouldn't do it. But they're getting paid to do it to stir up emotions. And see, emotions then can actually become, in that sense, like a distraction, because our emotions can actually keep us from feeling things. Actually, a lot of times they actually come out of not feeling or shutting down our feelings. This is big stuff. So when we get emotions, we get emotions from feeling something, because we're feeling something. That's where emotions come from. So there always has to be a feeling behind the emotion, but that doesn't mean that we're actually honoring, embracing, or stepping into those feelings. But what happens is that even though emotions come out a lot of times of feeling, they actually end up shutting down our feeling. Let me repeat that. Even though your emotions come out of feeling something, they actually end up shutting down feeling. And this is like a distraction. This is like an addiction. This is like saying, I don't like what's happening in my life, so I'm just going to go do some drugs. Or I'm just going to go drink. So is it wrong to feel? Is it wrong to have emotions? No, it's not wrong to have emotions. But what happens is we've moved into this overly dramatic, emotional society. And our emotions have become a way of communicating, and not necessarily in favorable ways, but they have become the addiction to avoid feeling. Think about that for a moment. Our emotions have become the addiction to not feeling. It's a pretty interesting concept right there when you think about it. So our emotions are like that distraction. They're like going and drinking when you're having a rough day. So instead of dealing with your rough day and facing the things you don't like and the things that are painful and the things that are hard, you go have a drink so that you can forget about it. That's basically what emotions are, is that drink, that joint, that drug, that escapism, whatever it is. It's an addiction, in essence. There's a whole pattern behind that when it's connected with a feeling. Now, if we are to truly break through something, and here's the challenge, because you've got a lot of people who have powerful healing energy, right? They know the concepts spiritually. They understand the concepts of the spiritual paths and the spiritual processes and the things that need to be done. But many of them have actually shut down the feeling part. They have emotions, but they don't necessarily feel through something. And part of that happens also because as we step onto our spiritual path, we feel like, I can't let things get to me anymore. I can't be impacted by things. I can't let my emotions run wild. I can't do this. And I see even a lot of religious circles now where people are using biblical quotes that are actually connected to feeling to justify their emotions. And there's a very big difference. The Bible is not talking about being emotional. It's talking about feeling right in here, in your heart. But when we're busy running away from that, we don't actually do the work. So here again, we can meditate to calm ourselves down. We could do yoga. We could do all kinds of things. We could sit and chant. We can say positive affirmations. We can do all kinds of things. But that doesn't mean that we are feeling. It doesn't mean that we're actually dealing with the issue. And we've got all these tools out there, right, to deal with our issues. But they're not teaching us necessarily to feel. So this is huge. If we are to actually heal, break through, thrive, we must feel. You have to go through the feeling. You can't go into the avoidance. You can't run away into the distractions, into just the feel-good things. And I understand that those can help. They can help in the moment. It's like, when you get certain panic attacks or things coming up, and you need to go run because you need to pull that excess energy out of your body so that you can get in and handle it. So some of those things are great, maybe as a precursor to something. But what happens is we go and do those, and then things diffuse a little bit, and we don't ever get back to actually doing the work and feeling, and actually feel our way through what's happening and go into those feelings and actually deal with it. Because then it's pacified. It's like taking that drink, and it's like, oh, well, I'm relaxed now, so now I don't have to deal with anything that happened in my day because I feel better now having this drink. I gave up drinking, and not even, I had tapered down to like 1 glass or 2 glasses once a week, and I haven't even done that in years. Because I realized the energetic openings that were happening, that were allowing things in that I didn't want to have in. So, it's very, very interesting when we get into this. Now, many practices focus only on the thriving, only on the so-called healing or the breakthrough. Okay. But that leaves, when we do that, that leaves our feelings trapped inside of us and not dealt with. And this is why a lot of people have stuff from like their childhood and early on and things like that, because they're always given the distraction. Oh, you had bad, oh, well, let's go eat food. Let's go do this. Let's go do that. And, you'll feel better. Let's just take a little break. Let's take a weekend trip, whatever. You'll feel better. But the feelings never get taken care of. So it's kind of like that Band-Aid. It's kind of like pulling it away. So what happens is then we never deal with it. So we actually start building toxins up. We actually start building things up in our body, and it leaves the feelings trapped in our cells. And what happens is when that's trapped within us, then it's manifesting those things in our life. So even though we carry a positive mindset, we might be using spiritual tools, we might be reading the Bible, we might be doing whatever, because those feelings are trapped in us and we've never dealt with them fully. And there's always layers. You think you've dealt with something, right? And then, a few years later, it comes back up to the surface again, and you find a whole new layer of it. And, that happens. That happens. But you got to feel it and delve into it. And the reason we don't a lot of times is because it hurts or it's painful. And we think it's too negative, and we can't be in that negative energy, because if we go into that negative energy, we're going to manifest negative things. And actually, that's not necessarily true. The only place you can heal and to clear it is to go into it. And that's where it gets challenging for people. And I'm going to talk more about that. And so when we don't, and those feelings get trapped, they get trapped in us, right? They get trapped in our heart. They get trapped in our mind. They get trapped in our physical body. Okay. They get trapped into that cellular level. And so when they're trapped in there, we can do all the practices in the world, and we're still manifesting something different than what we're practicing. And this is, I think, partly connected to why we see some of the spiritual people, because they've learned to be in this tough space, this survival space. And the feelings still haven't actually been dealt with. Even though they can be at peace with things, even though they can do a lot of things, it still hasn't totally been dealt with. And so that is continuing to manifest, right? And the longer those feelings are trapped in there, the more damage it does. Just like the longer toxins are trapped in your body, the more it damages your organs and your body's ability to function and process and all of those things. It's the same concept, only on an energy level. And so this is why we can do all these things and we think, I'm being a good person, I'm doing all of this stuff. Why are some of these negative things happening in my life? Because this hasn't been dealt with. These feelings are trapped inside of us. So what happens is, in order to get to those thriving spots, we've got to clear, we've got to cleanse, we've got to heal, right? But we cannot cleanse, we cannot clear, we cannot heal until we are ready to feel. We say that again. We cannot cleanse, we cannot clear, we cannot heal until we are ready to feel. And that means everything, not just the good stuff. That means the pain, the fear, all of it in there. We have to be ready to feel it. And it feels icky sometimes, and we don't like it. But that's okay. And we wonder, how can children be the way they are? Well, first of all, they haven't built up years of toxins in their body, right? That's why their bodies function well and they're active and they're vibrant and they're full of energy. Well, the same way, when you're young, you haven't built up all of this garbage to interfere with things. And what happens with children is that children feel everything because they're so present. They don't have to work. They don't have all these distractions in life. So they can actually feel things. They don't go into the suppression because they're in the moment. They're very in the moment. And when they're angry, they feel angry. When they have pain, they sit in that pain until it passes. They move past it. They feel it. And then they let it go and they're on with their life, right? That's why they don't like somebody one day and they like them the next day, because they let it go. They went into feeling in there. So this is also part of why life seems like it was better when we were children. Certainly society and things have changed, but even more than the changes in the world is that aspect of feel. And what's happened over the years, and we say, why do our children seem so damaged? Because we're not allowing them to feel. We're expecting them to be adults when they're 4 years old. They're not playing, they're not feeling. We're telling them, part of all of this coddling that we do with them. I mean, yes, we want them to have self-worth and value, but a lot of that coddling is not giving them the self-worth and value, and it's shutting down their feelings. It's allowing them to be emotional without feeling things. And so all of that energy that they normally wouldn't see until later in life is trapped early. So is it any wonder that there's so much of a doom and gloom mentality in a lot of our youth, in a lot of our younger generations, and a lot of our children? Because we're not moving them through it. Matter of fact, we're justifying their fears. We're justifying it and say, oh yeah, you should be terrified. You should be. And this is a very fine line between acknowledging what you're feeling. But what's happened in our society is we're not moving people through it. We're not actually embracing the feeling. We're saying, oh yeah, just reside in that. And we don't need to reside in it. That's not where we need to be. We don't have to reside in it, but we need to feel it in order to deal with it. Think of it like this, right? You want to help a friend move. Well, that's fine. You can energetically, right, send them good vibes so that everything flows well and stuff like that. But you can't actually help them move unless you go down there and you pick up a box and move it out of their house into the moving truck, and from the moving truck into their new place. You haven't actually done the action. You can't feel, you can't make the shift, you can't make the translation, you can't truly manifest until you go into the feeling, until you go in and get into it. Again, not the emotion. It's not all about the emotions, but the feeling. And we have to transform that feeling. We have to work with that feeling in there. So what we need to do is we need to feel our way through something. And literally, when we feel something, a feeling, to feel something is literally a test. It's a test of, are we going to choose divinity? Are we going to choose to stand with God? Are we going to choose to stand in divine presence, divine source? Or are we going to look for a material world escape of some sort? So when we feel something, it is literally a test. What are you going to go through? What are you going to choose to deal with that feeling? And the feeling oftentimes is connected or showing us, at least from a code perspective, where we feel restricted, where we feel confined, where we feel pressure to keep up with the world's image and what the world says is pleasurable and what the world says is valuable, versus choosing experiences, choosing to see the magnificence, choosing to see the awe, the wonder, the inspiration, and choosing things of real value versus superficial value. And that is the test. Are you going to choose real joy and happiness or something that is superficial joy and happiness that ends up leaving you in a worse space? Just like when you're constantly working, well, I'm working to get this boat, and maybe initially you enjoy the boat or you enjoy whatever thing or a bigger house or whatever it is. But then it gets heavier and heavier because trying to maintain that and have the storage for it and have the bigger home and to have these bigger things. And pretty soon you're not enjoying any of it anymore. And there's no real value in it. I mean, it's not opening your heart up. People say, well, the experience does and this and that. And we could go off on some big tangents on that, which I won't do right now. But you're putting your joy in a material thing as opposed to an experience. And the material thing isn't giving you the real joy. It's the experience, it's the connection, it's the time. And then if you're in the confinement and you don't get to have the experience, all you have left is the material thing, which becomes heavy and burdensome and weighs you down, just like toxins in the body. Okay. So we need to feel our way through something. So we need to choose. And just because things get a little tough, a little uncomfortable, something that we don't like, we have to make sure we are not choosing that addiction or that escapist or that comfortable misery, right? Which is what any addiction is, no matter what form it comes in. It's a comfortable misery because it gives you temporary comfort only to drop you into greater misery and pain and suffering. We need to choose what is in that alignment. We need to choose that God energy. We need to choose the true joy and the true happiness. And that's, of course, tied into a lot of things, knowing our value and our worth and all of these different things. But we need to feel our way through something. And our tendency is to reject our feeling when something is too hard to deal with in the moment or too painful or overwhelming. And that overwhelming is the big key for a lot of things, because even a lot of very spiritually advanced people go into overwhelm, or they're so used to shutting out the pain to tough their way through something out of survival. And then we turn to addictive patterns. And again, that addictive patterns can be yoga, it could be baths, it could be, all kinds of things. All kinds of things can be in addictive patterns. It's not just drugs or just alcohol or just that. And they can still be self-destructive in that process because we've rejected our feeling. We've rejected the feeling process. So what happens is when we get in that overwhelmed space or we think, I've got too much to deal with, so everything's going to go on the back burner except for this one immediate thing in the moment. And we shut down feeling in that process. If something's too painful, I can't deal with the pain. I can't deal with the feeling of abuse. I can't deal with the suffering that I'm feeling. I can't deal with the hardship. It's too much. It's overwhelming me. I'm overloaded, right? Well, really, what are you searching for in that drug? What are you searching for in the addiction? Why does it do what it does? Because you took a break. You can take a break and embrace your feeling. And that's really what it's about. In the addiction pattern, or choosing the false joy and happiness, what you're doing is choosing a different feeling. In a sense, you're trying to find a different feeling. You're still shutting things down, but you're not actually dealing with the feeling. You're escaping from the feeling as opposed to facing the feeling. So it never heals. It just keeps building up and locking up further into ourselves and creating more garbage. It's just like if you turn to junk food and then you have a little bit of junk food and pretty soon you need more or want more junk food to just keep going. And you're just trying to survive and you're wondering, why is my body breaking down? And you're just eating this junk food and junk food and junk food instead of going for the healthy food, which actually could turn things around for you and help you get through something and make better than that junk food. But our tendency is to reach for the junk food instead of the healthy food, which actually gives our body the strength so that we can deal with something. So it's, again, the same sort of concept. Our reactionary response or our freezing response is to shut it all down and block it all out, when what we need to do is to go into it. We need to honor the time to go into the feeling and the feeling we're having. Even though our logical mind says, I don't have time for this, we have to make the time for it. Because when we make the time for it and we honor it, then we can actually be more present. We can be healthier in all the other things. And we can actually get to that true joy. And we won't be carrying this huge pack around with us, dragging it along, still trying to walk. I want you to think for a minute that, like, every time you don't deal with a feeling, it's like throwing another 50-pound pack on your back to carry around, or another ball and chain tied to your foot while you're trying to walk. It's going to get heavier and heavier and heavier and harder and harder. And you can have all the positive thoughts in the world saying, oh, I love my chains. Oh, I love that I can move slower now. I love this. I love that. But in reality, those chains aren't going to go away until you stop and you say, this chain hurts me. It's weighing me down. It's making my life heavy. It's dragging on me and it's painful. And so I'm going to stop and I'm going to get rid of this chain and ball and stop carrying this weight around. I hope this is starting to make some sense here. So what happens when we do this, and we do this avoidance sort of thing in a way, it's too painful or overwhelming. A lot of times this, especially with spiritual people, is a split reaction. I'm okay, I'll get through it, I'll be fine, right? And we turn to those addictive patterns again, whatever it is, whatever your form of escapism is. It could even be walking in the woods. I mean, in certain extents, yes, that has a beneficial aspects to help us clear some things, but it can still be an addictive pattern. It's, again, it doesn't have to be all about drugs. So what we're really saying here is, we have to experience that feeling. Not just know it, not just be aware of it. We have to experience fully to truly help others and to receive the successes. And so we shift this addictive pattern, this pain, this overwhelming feeling, um, not being able to deal with things, handle things, whatever it is. We shift this, or it begins to shift, from being a lesson, a teacher, or a connection to our soul work, into being an energetic toxin and poisoning, which our body then responds to and manifests. And I have a lot of notes here. So if you see me looking over, I've got referring to the notes I have there. And then it starts manifesting from that. So again, just like when you put toxins in your body, right? If your toxins are not being dealt with and cleared out physically, what happens? It starts impacting your organs. It affects your ability to breathe. It affects your heart's ability to function right. Your body doesn't get rid of that garbage. And when it doesn't get rid of the garbage, it starts creating illness, and it creates other pains and more things to deal with in there, and disease in the body. And so, when we're eating the toxic foods, our body doesn't release the toxins, and then it creates disease. And so the same thing is happening mentally, emotionally, and spiritually when we stop or block feeling or ignore it. We might not even be deliberately blocking it. We just ignore it. We get distracted. We go on. We think it's okay. It's not a big deal. I'm not worried about it, and let it go. But we haven't, again, embraced the feeling. So all feelings really are there to create a lesson for us. They're an experience that we are giving, and that feeling is a teacher for us. It's teaching us something, but we rarely ever stop to get the lesson out of what it is teaching. And what happens is this connects to our soul work. So we might wonder, well, why do I have to go through abuse? Why do I have to go through these various things that I go through, these experiences in life, these tough challenges, these hardships? Because somewhere that is connected to our soul work. And that's one of the things we have to figure out. How is that connected to my soul work? I had somebody, a friend of mine recently, and she doesn't mind me using her name in here. And she says, I don't understand why I have to deal with this person who is, a recovering or possible current addict, and who has these PTSD, and who treats me this way, and who's, why have I dealt with this abusive thing all of my life? And why has this happened in my childhood, and this and that? And finally, we brought it full circle. And I said, because without these experiences, without going into this experience, you cannot do the work that you are choosing or wanting to do. You want to help people out of these situations. You want to help them get a better life. You want to help them do these things. But if you have no practical, real life world experience with dealing with these people, you do not understand what they're going through. You don't understand the struggles that they have inside of them. And you can't fully be in your helpful space without understanding those struggles. If you've never been homeless, I mean, you can have concepts and you can have ideas, right, about it. But if you have never been there firsthand, you don't actually understand the struggles that are there. If you've never been without food, you don't understand what that struggle is actually about. And what happens is so many people, again, they get locked into the emotional aspects. They get locked into shutting that pain down out of a survival instinct. But then it continues to manifest that poverty. It continues to manifest that hardship over and over and over again, because the feeling hasn't been there. They never delved into the feeling because they were so busy surviving. And this is the same thing that we see with addicts. They're so busy trying to survive, feeling that they need that next addiction, that next fix on things. And this, again, there's the parallel in the spiritual world. You need the next gemstone, you need the next book, you need the next this and the next that and the next tool and the next practice. But it's no different than the junkie's fix in there, because you have to go back to the experience, and you have to learn from the experience, and you have to embrace the experience, because only when you embrace it do you get the rush of overcoming it. And you know that rush when it happens. This is the rush that Jessie went through when she was in her vehicle in -30, -40 degrees. And when you say, yeah, I might die, I might not make it through the night. But when you wake up the next morning, it's like, because she went fully into that feeling, fully into that emotion, it was gone. And it's part of why people say, how are you still functioning today? Because there were points. I mean, I'm not saying everything is cleared, but there were points that she went into it fully and just surrendered to it and just let it teach her and just let it, the experience, be felt fully. What does it feel like to know you might not wake up? What does it feel like to know this could be the last moment? All of these things. And so that doesn't necessarily hung because, and then again, you have this charge the next day. Like, it's the same thing when we make that breakthrough, right? When we've been tormenting over something, and finally you get the solution. And even sometimes when we get the solution, we're resisting the solution because we don't like the way it looks because of the way society is programmed it in us. And so we resist the solution. Well, the same thing happens, when we're not allowing ourselves to immerse in the experience because it feels overwhelming or too hard or too painful or too much or whatever it is. We cut ourselves off from the solutions. So this is a really, really powerful thing. So when this backs up, again, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, when we stop and block these things, we are creating toxicity. No matter how many affirmations we say, we are creating a toxicity in our emotional, mental, and spiritual states. So you can do all the manifesting stuff, you can take all kinds of action in your life, but if you've never dealt with those emotions, those toxicities are still there. If you've never done that cleanse, and a lot of people think, well, I'll just do a cleansing meditation, boom, and it's all gone. No, you have to go into the feeling. You have to really, really feel it. And we want to work through or with those also that have real life experiences. So when we're looking for the mentor, and people want that as well. So think about it. If you're here to do your soul work and you haven't done this going into the feeling and dealing with that, and you've been blocking and stopping things because you're trying to survive, and then you forget about it as you start to come out of it, right? You're not fully going through those experiences. And if you're a person who is searching for a mentor or a teacher, right? All things being equal, you want to work with that person who has actually stood in your shoes and understands what it feels like to be in your experiences, not the person who just says, oh, well, say these things or say this prayer or whatever, and you'll be fine, and has never experienced it. They have no concept of what it's like to feel that position, that experience. And I'm not saying that we can't 100% help people that are there, but we also don't have the experience to fully understand it. And this is why I don't get offended when people go to other resources to help them out in their path, because it's like, hey, I might not have experience in certain things. So you should find somebody who does. And that doesn't mean you have to abandon one person. It just means you might need them for that part of things. And when we find those people who really have faced their experiences, who really went into the feelings, who really made that work and embrace it, they too can help us to be successful because they've created a success. And again, that success is not based on your wealth, your finances, and all of that. I mean, there is a certain amount of flow because, as we know, right, if we were to go in and transform these feelings, we and there's variables, because yes, we're always going to hit challenging years, but those challenges can change, right? Instead of us being the victim, we might help somebody else out of being a victim. So those challenges and current, energy patterns could shift a bit in there. But a lot of our experiences and a lot of our suffering and a lot of our hardships are because we haven't dealt with the feeling part of things. So, you know, I can take it like with my weight. A lot of people, sometimes they see it a little bit on me in the videos, sometimes not. But, I look at it and it's like, okay, I eat healthy foods, I do all these things, and I'm always honing into new layers with my health, always honing into new pieces that are connected to why my body is doing what it's doing. And there are definitely physical pieces. But if I'm eating well, I'm not even eating 1,500 calories a day a lot of times. And some people say, well, maybe you need to eat more calories. Well, maybe there's some truth to that. But there's also a lot of other things that are connected to it. So if I'm doing that and I'm not eating a lot, now granted, I can't be as physically active as what I'm in the past, but even with what I do, there is no reason that my body should be sitting at 195 pounds right now, which is what I weigh. And there's no way. And maybe I carry it well, and that's fine. Maybe I carry my hardships well. That's okay. But the reality of it is I'm still carrying that weight. So my body is at a point now of responding to these other experiences in life, these challenges, these hardships, the different pieces. I have different layers. We're in my code pattern right now. I have things that are resurfacing from 9 years ago when Jessie, was in that vehicle and trying to survive through winter, when she was going through the hardest points, when she had people dying in her life and her love was dying in her life. And, all of these things, there's these components in there that the body was triggered into such a survival mode and so much pain. And I'm not sure that that was fully dealt with at that time. So it's been holding this in the cells. And because we go through these cycles, what happens is now I'm back in that same energetic pattern that she was in when she was going through all that hardship, where she lost her job and then Orly took a bad dive and then Orly passed um, and then everything fell apart, in other work areas and opportunities. And then, she got a job, and then her mom passed the day that she was starting the job. Um, and then the first 3 months of the job was just total hardship. And she was almost crying every day because, you know, it was just the situation didn't feel good, and people were not always nice and things like that. And she had to go in and transform a lot of that consciously. um, in there. She had to go in and feel that pain in order to transform it, not run from it, not go find another job, not those things. She had to delve in and transform it. And she had to really get into that acceptance of her circumstances and where things were at and all of that. And that's not just about being, putting on your grown-up pants and being responsible. There's so much more to it in there. So then what happens is, as I revisit those cycle patterns from where she started in that point of the journey to where she got to those really hard points, I am just completing that 3-year pattern and I'm back in that cycle again. So what happens is, because those things weren't dealt with and probably forgotten about or whatever else along the way, even though she managed and got through things and worked her way through and kept her inner calm and all of that, it was still, the experiences still locked things into the body. So when some things happened a couple of years back, it started triggering stuff. It started triggering unknown fears that I didn't even know were there, because they were locked into the cells. And so when hardships started to come up again and things got challenging again, particularly this year, the body goes into this survival mode. So it tries to hold on to everything. It won't process things. It won't clear things, because it's saying, oh, I know this pattern. We went through this 9 years ago and I didn't get food and I didn't get this. See, it holds that memory into it. So the body is responding to these energetic patterns coming back up and how they were dealt with in the past, which is why it's so important for us to deal with things in the present so that we don't create these future issues for ourselves and forget about them and then wonder 9 years later, why is this coming back up again? Why am I in the same position I was 9 years ago? different, but same at at the same time. And so the body is automatically holding that memory like, oh, okay, we're at this point of that energetic pattern. So we better start storing. We better start holding on to things. And even though this weight started coming on a lot, a while back, it's because it was connected to other traumas that were never totally dealt with, never totally faced. And recently I've been connecting with things of how much pain and suffering and turbulence and everything there was connected to physical beauty, to being thin, to being model-like beautiful, all of those things. And so the weight then becomes a protective barrier. It becomes like a guard. It's like the armor that you put on. And it doesn't totally protect you from things, but you believe you're safe, with that. And it's oftentimes a very subconscious process. And then, of course, we've been taught, oh, just embrace your beauty because that's where you're at. And yes, there's a whole concept behind that. And there's a whole concept between now fat is fashionable and all of these things. But the reality of it is that it's locked in from all of these other pieces and components that weren't dealt with, that weren't felt, where the feelings weren't addressed fully. And until we get into that, again, that feeling and really feel our way through it, we can't transform it. Until you get into the kitchen, you can't cook a dish. You might be able to pour something out of a box and deal with that temporarily, but that's only going to go so far. You're not actually cooking a meal and bringing the components together and mixing the ingredients and plating it up. And, then when you plate it up, you could plate it up and it can look like a sloppy mess, or you can choose to plate it up and make it look beautiful. But until you get into it, it doesn't transform. So, and it's challenging, especially if you've done a lot of spiritual work. It's very challenging for people to say, well, obviously you're not doing your work, or obviously you're holding on to all this garbage. And you're thinking, I've released all of this. I've been through so much. How can I be holding on to all of it? I've dealt with it. No, we probably dealt with it mentally. We probably maybe have dealt with some of the emotional things. Um, we've dealt with, things as a spiritual process, but we haven't felt it. And the body, see, is always going to respond. So if we're holding these toxins from the pain, from the suffering, from the challenges, whatever it is, from previous experiences, if we are holding that in the mental, emotional, and spiritual, energetic areas, our body is going to respond and also hold toxins. Because again, like with my body, it's got all of this pain associated with being jealous. It's got all this hatred and hurtfulness that it received, even though it was striving for different things, even though, it was using that to be accepted, things like that in younger years. And so now it's like, well, I don't have to be accepted. I don't have to be this. So, again, still not dealing with those feelings in there, still not getting into the core of it, still not getting into the clearing of it fully. Because it's like, oh, I don't have to do that. Oh, I'm not living in the vanity. Oh, I'm not doing this. Well, that may be true, but that doesn't mean you've cleared and detoxified it totally. So we don't always like to hear these things, especially when we're spiritually evolved. We don't always like to hear that piece that, well, you're holding toxins, you're holding garbage in your sphere. It's like, I'm exhausted, I'm worn out, I'm overwhelmed. How can I be holding all of that stuff? So because it wasn't dealt with before. So when we have these opportunities where, like in the code influences, past is coming back up, we want to step in and feel it, whatever that feeling is. We want to really get in there. And when we get into these unexpected things, and like I said, with me, there's a weight thing, and I realized, oh my God, look at all these ties that are connected to the weight. No wonder my body is like weighed down, not to mention, physical surgeries and everything else that it's been through. And yes, there are some actual physical components that probably hold the weight in there where things cannot function as well as they used to, or things like that. And there are those pieces that are involved. But again, it doesn't explain the volume of weight I'm carrying. It doesn't explain why things are in some of the conditions that they're in. So when something defies physical logic, like my weight defies physical logic, because I'm not putting an overload of calories in it. I'm not eating just junk food. Um, I'm not totally without exercise or movement or things like that. So my weight is defying logic or reason, but it's still an issue. Then it is likely to be connected to unprocessed trauma and feelings that are incomplete. And again, our feelings are the lessons that we haven't learned fully from the experiences that we have had in life. So, as I start to delve in this, what is my weight attached to? Why would I hold on to this weight? Well, yeah, because there was so much trauma involved in being beautiful. There was so much trauma involved in being thin, whether we are talking stalkers, whether we are talking the 7 rapes in 1 year, whether we are talking the jealousy, the hatred, not being taken seriously, the revenges that people took on me, the abusing that beauty on my part, the components of only having superficial connections and never getting a true loving connection. There's a lot of trauma there. There's a lot of components there that are not complete. And even though intellectually, again, spiritually, and all of those things, you have to go back into the feeling. And that can look a little scary, and that can be a little challenging. But those feelings, unresolved, create the circumstances that we live in. So they create our future. They create all those things. The pain doesn't just go away. The hurt doesn't just go away. All of the things attached to the issue don't just go away until we feel it. And again, only until we get in and feel it can we transform it or transmute it in there. So what happens is that creates restriction and mobility, the inability to enjoy life, because that's the programs everything's running on, because the program has never truly been changed in there. So the emotions teaches about feelings, okay, through the experiences that we have and that we have had in our past, because we're having experiences now. So the emotions that we have coming up about our experiences, whether that's the frustration, the overwhelm, whatever it is, the suffering, whatever it is teaching us about our feelings through the experience. So they're it's kind of like when your body has a symptom, it aches. It aches about something, or it goes into exhaustion, or it doesn't have energy. Okay, that feeling is telling you need to rest. I mean, that emotion is telling you, that symptom is telling you there's something wrong that you need to deal with. There's something here that needs to be addressed. So if you're feeling tired, your body may be dropping in its immunity. It may need some extra rest. It may need some things. And we think, I can't do this. I don't have the time for it. I don't have this. Well, the same thing happens with our feelings, right? I don't have time to deal with that feeling right now because I have to survive. No, we have to take the time for it. Just like when your body starts to get sick, if you don't take the time for it up front, you are going to get sick, and you are going to create a true illness because you never dealt with it. You never took care of yourself on the front end. And feeling is the same way. If you don't deal with the feelings when they first come up, they are going to build and manifest these negative situations. So, for example, like with a lot of what I see with spiritual people, they suppressed, ignored, rejected, whatever on those feelings, even though they may have thought they dealt with them, or they went into the survival or any of the other things, and that created the poverty patterns, that created the deprivation, that created the suffering, and that stayed within the cells. And that's why a lot of them are going through these experiences. And again, part of it is the code patterns. And part of it is we can say, well, I didn't feel like I was suffering. I embraced the positive sides of it. But yeah, but we still had the feelings of suffering, even though we weren't in the emotions of suffering. So it has to be cleared out in there. So when we look at this, we're learning when we are or are not learning something, which leads to lack or poverty. Again, why many spiritual or wise people are struggling. They're struggling and they're dealing with big life challenges because what happened is their experiences got too hard. And while they so-called dealt with them, they did not truly feel them. And this is part of surviving, because when you're in survival mode, you're not dealing with things. You're just trying to get through them. And we see this in a lot of abuse situations, which is why victims of abuse shut down and have a lot of issues. And they may become passive aggressive because that abusiveness, they never felt their way through it. They never moved through it. They shut down. They just tried to survive the situations. They were in a survival mode, just like if you're out in the wilderness and you're trying to survive until you can get back to civilization. And, you're just trying to get through the situation. But then you get back into civilization and you don't take the time to deal with that survival space. Because it's like, oh, I'm in the comfort now, I'm okay. But then you don't deal with it. Now, if we feel through the soul self, we are embracing that spirit energy. What we're doing is we're literally choosing God, divine presence. We're choosing that path to move through the situation. So when we are in these situations, we have to, and the feeling is there, we have to make that choice. Are we going to take the Band-Aid or are we going to take the real thing? Are we going to choose spirit? Are we going to choose to align with God to get through the situation? Or are we going to choose an addiction to try to get through the situation? Either way, we may get through it, but one is going to have continued residual effects where the other will clear and cleanse and bring us into the true state of joy instead of that temporary state. And just like any addiction, once you take the addiction, you're going to have to keep dealing with the consequences of choosing that addiction. Whereas if you take the path of true health and true light and true love, you're not going to be dealing with it. And again, these are some very subtle and very fine lines in here. So if we're embracing that path, saying, nope, you can tempt me with everything in the world to make me get some temporary pleasure or euphoria or whatever, but I'm not going to take it. I'm going to face the hardships. I'm going to go through it because I really want that real joy. So when we make that choice, what we're doing is we're releasing that material world influence. We're releasing the temptation. We're saying no to it. We're saying no to what looks good to the human self but doesn't actually have any value. And we're choosing what actually has value, even though it doesn't always look so good to the human self. And we're when we choose or we are releasing that material world influence, we're also releasing its ability to influence and keep interfering with us, because every time we choose to face an experience with God in hand, with divine source in hand, then we are clearing our temptations. The temptations stop coming up eventually. It may take a few times or a few cycles to make sure we're really strong in it. but it becomes easier and easier and easier instead of the other path of the addictions, which becomes harder and harder and harder along the way. So it has less and less influence over us. And, when we don't choose materialism, let me look at this for a second. When we don't choose the Christ energy, we are actually choosing that materialism, that addiction, the temporary pleasure. And this can bring up things like passive aggressive behavior. It can bring up bipolar behavior. It can bring up manipulation things. It leads us to seek company in the suffering that we are feeling or experiencing. And it leads us to seek external things for comfort as opposed to the internal. And the external is never going to fully give us that comfort or security. And what that does is, because we're constantly seeking this solution through something external, this creates a poverty mindset, is what happens. It creates a deprivation mindset, a mindset of pain. And when we go into that mindset, regardless of our wealth or our possessions or anything else, or the mantras or the chants or the practices, okay, regardless of all of that, we build an animosity, a jealousy, an envy, which is, of course, one of the great sins, towards others. And it's oftentimes unconscious when we do that, because we're like, they're having so much joy in their life, and I'm got all this heaviness, and I've got all this suffering, and I've got all of this going on. So it creates that poverty mindset. And we know then, once that mindset sets in, conscious or unconscious, it creates more reasons to be in poverty. It creates more poverty experiences, not always to make us suffer, but to give us another chance to choose something different, to take a different path. So, we keep going through these experiences. Well, what are you going to choose this time? Are you going to be stubborn and try to do it all yourself? Or are you going to let people help you? Are you going to face the fact that this doesn't feel good and transform that? Or are you going to remain in that woe is me victim suffering space in there? And then, even though we're doing all this great work, and then we turn around and go, but those people are having such a good life, it's so easy for them. And on one hand, we can say, well, that's because they are choosing the materialism, but we have to remember they don't have the things of real value. They still are in a different type of pain. It just visually looks better because of the type of world. What we're not seeing is the truth, which means that a lot of these people living in excesses and stuff like that, they're not happy. They have a lot of pressure on them. They have a lot of pain in them, which is why they have those things in there. Of course, we know when we get onto the real spiritual path, it is about being comfortable but not excessive in things. And that's where feelings come into play, or feeling something comes into play, because it frees us from those restrictive confinement, those confining patterns. And it actually frees us up and allows us to really experience life, find the value, find the joy, find the thrill, find the excitement, find the awe, the wonder, all of those things. And it frees us from that pattern of having to chase the material components, and to realize, that excessiveness, particularly in material things, is as much of a drain as the poverty is. They're just two different ends of the spectrum. It's all on the same thing. They're just two different ends of the spectrum. And, sometimes even too much of a good thing can be a bad thing in there. So where a spiritual person does this, and they fall into this poverty mindset, for example, they may end up in poverty, in homelessness, in survival mode, because they are not attached to or governed by material things. So they may not be attached to the addiction, so to say. They may not be attached to the material aspects of things. So when they're not attached to it, what happens is they still see they still see a suffering in a sense, um, because they handle the emotions and they focus on being strong, but they ignore the feeling. And as a result, they do not fully process things. And that leads to what I'm going to refer to as spiritual sludge, right? Spiritual sludge. It's like mud poop. It's spiritual sludge. It's only partially processed. It's only partially digested in there. And when you have that spiritual sludge going on, it breaks down our etheric and it drains our energy just like physical toxins. It suffocates us. It can actually again have these physical effects of lowering our oxygen, draining our iron out, which is a huge nutrient that is important in our body for breathing, for health, for energy, for all those things. So it actually starts to do this, and and it's a result of not fully processing things. Um, and so it breaks down our etheric fields, so our mental, our emotional, and our spiritual, which are etheric aspects, and it drains our energy out just like those physical toxins, and it creates sludge and toxins built up in our bodies, which creates physical malfunction, which is why a lot of people in these spiritual processes, they keep having these challenges and challenges and challenges over and over again, because they haven't completely dealt with things. And again, a lot of strong spiritual people are finding themselves more and more in these survival spaces. And, you know, as one of the people that I connect with once in a while says, it's like, you know, if you're not handling something well, you need to be still and you need to pray and you need to be with God and divine source, whatever your wording is for that. And if you're not getting results, then you need to do more stillness and being with that because why is that? Because when we go to that space, we are actually facing and dealing with the feeling is why that is. And so it's like, no, you shouldn't move on until that is done, until that's gone. And, you know, we try to move on because again, we override it with these positive affirmations and different things instead of getting in there and dealing with it. And, you know, so again, it creates these more and more challenging situations. You know, the dust is going to build up in your house if you never clean the house. It's going to get filthier and filthier, and your health is going to go down. It's the same thing that's happening in our etheric or spiritual or our energy field in there. So we need to choose the real happiness over the addiction. Okay. And we do that by bringing the Christ energy, or spirit, or again, God, divine source, whatever your wording is, into the material experience that we're having. And that stops the suffering. That stops the suffering. So when we feel, we will choose that real happiness. It may not look pleasant to our human self, but our soul self is like, yes, this is what we need to do. This is what's going to get us through. It's kind of like, yeah, when I give my body that real organic, untainted food, non-toxic, you know, live sprouted food, whatever you want to say, when I give it the real thing. And of course, there is no greater nourishment or food source on any level than God or divine source or divine presence energy in there. So the suffering comes from the rejection, literally is coming from the rejection of God and choosing the material aspect. Again, even if that's an affirmation or a practice or lighting a candle, I mean, those are all material things, even though there's energetic components to them, they're material things. It comes from rejecting God or divine source and choosing material existence instead of God or divine source. And so when we face the challenges, when we go into the feeling, we're opening divine presence into our temptations. So this is no different if you've ever read the Bible. And when they face the challenges, you have those people who give in and sell out and all of those things, which is what we do when we don't feel. And then you have those people that stop and pray. And they ask for divine assistance. And again, that's where when we bring that in, we actually can embrace the feeling, because what we're asking for is not to avoid the feeling, not to avoid the experience, but to have the strength to move through it. And again, we have to follow that up with action and all of that good stuff. Now, going back, as children, we feel everything and we're very present. So we tend to move on easily. But we are tempted with material things. And as as teens, we shut down our feelings and we shift to emotions for our release. So we become emotional instead of feeling something, because we are heavy into our addictions. We're addicted to being accepted by our peers. We're addicted to having the right clothing, to having the right look, to um, having certain possessions, a certain type of phone, a car, all these things. These are all addictions in a sense. We're addicted to material things. And so we go to emotions because then emotions have been made acceptable. Oh, they're a teenager, they're emotional because of their hormones or blah, 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 blah. But when we accept that, we're allowing them to shut down the feelings. See, that's why children are past things. They go on and it's like, they blow a lot of it off, which is also why children become under such attack, because if they can stop them from feeling, they can create this major trauma throughout their entire life. And they can keep them in these cycles of trauma and misery and suffering. Whereas kids that had a lot of, great experiences as childhood and were allowed to feel a lot and to find their strength in their challenges instead of just caving into them, pushing them over, trying to survive their way through it. We're very resilient as adults. We're very strong when they had to do the adulting thing. So as adults, we block the feeling. We're no longer allowed to have emotions. It's like, okay, you're not a teenager anymore. You can't have your emotions. So what happens is, as adults, we block or reject or stop exerting emotion in there. So we block and reject the feelings. And then we stop experiencing the emotion because we're not allowed to do that because we're a certain age, right? So now we're not allowed to have the emotion. And that's where the toxic sludge builds up. So it's from working for material things instead of living and having experiences. Because again, you hit a certain age and all of a sudden society says, you can't live. You can't go have all these experiences. You're not a child anymore. You have to pay bills and you have to have this and you have to have that. So again, puts our whole focus on all of these material things and this pressure. And we sell out into this restriction, trying to keep everything going instead of honoring. No, we have to live life. We need to honor the cycles. We're going to have the holiday off. We're going to honor, whatever it is, Christmas or New Year's or whatever the day is for you, and we're going to honor that. And we're not going to work those days, and we're not going to, have certain things. So we start sacrificing a lot of our values. So again, we build more, and that's like sugar to yeast in your body. It just builds the toxic sludge, and the toxic sludge goes, oh, yum, I'm going to grow really well on that. And so, that toxic sludge just starts building up. And this is why we tend to feel so much of the heaviness. Even when we have the emotional things, there's a certain amount of outlet, even though we're not dealing with things and it's not healthy to not have the feelings there. But it's when we're adults and all of those other options are taken away from us. And we're said you can't express anything and you can't feel things and blah, 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 blah. And then you're locked into this other stuff, and that toxic sludge just builds and builds and builds. And then what happens is when we get into our older years, our elderly years, right? We stop longing for all the possessions. Matter of fact, a lot of times we're trying to give stuff away, right? The older you get, the closer to death you get. It's like, give it away, give it away. Of course, I've been giving things away a lot, and I'm very minimalistic, so I'm pretty good on that level in there. But what happens is as we grow older and we near death, we start to realize the value of our experiences, and we connect more again with things of real value as opposed to material possessions. And we feel things at that time because we're at that time like, I really need to feel what's happened in my life. Now that I'm dying, I need to actually feel this. And I need to really come in and embrace that this felt this way and that I had these feelings there, and let it all move through me. And this is why a lot of times right before death, you see people release. There's this release that happens because they've actually gotten a lesson from their life experiences. And some people, we say, man, they just carried that grudge to their grave, So sometimes, yes, people don't release something when they pass. But a lot of people do, and this is where they go through those waves towards the end of life, like, oh man, I'm sorry I didn't experience more in life. I'm sorry I let all of this work and stuff get in the way of these important things, and and I missed my child's this or my grandchild's that because I was too busy working and I was too busy trying to sustain this and trying to have these excesses and trying to provide, what I thought was a good life and all of these things. And we start to realize what we've missed, and then we go into the hurt and we go into the pain and we go into the sorrow and the regrets and all the other actual feelings, not just emotions, get into the feeling of it. And then we go into the fear of, what does that mean? What happens now because I chose these material things over God, spirit, divine source, whatever. But then we learn from it and we get the lessons and they start flooding through. And then all of a sudden the fear of dying goes away because we're not holding the feeling anymore. We're not holding that regret. We're not holding the fear, the survival, the overwhelm, whatever it is. We're not holding it anymore. And then we can just release. And that's where the euphoria comes in. So you see this whole process that we go through in life. So if we feel sooner, then we can move into that euphoria of spirit. And that allows us to really, that's where you see the people, they're just overflowing with God. They're overflowing with divine presence and divine spirit. And that's not just a radiant spirit that they carry or because they put a smile on their face. They have felt everything. And so they really feel the euphoria in there, and it's residing in their cells. And it doesn't matter how much they have, they are just so joyous. They're so at peace. They're so filled. They're so filled. But sadly, it's usually the last few days or the last couple of weeks of somebody's life before they get there, because they've forgotten about all of this stuff that got suppressed in their cells. They've forgotten about all these things. So when you have those hard things come up, feel it, embrace it, take the time for it. And that's when, if we feel these things sooner, if we go into the feelings, we can actually regain that childhood awe about life and wonder. And that's where those few spiritual people that really transcend it all. And they can then look at the hardships and they can be around the hardships and they can observe it and see it happening. And they're in tune with the awe and the excitement and the joy. And, they can see the magnificence in it because they've been through the illusionary magnificence And then they've been through the pain and the suffering and the rejecting of it. And then they've been able to come back full circle to see the true awe and wonder of it in there. So when we start to get that, even our bodies, even if they're challenged, we may find that they start to heal. So again, if we release the emotional toxic sludge, we remove those toxins that are being held, body, mind, and spirit, so to say, in there, our physical is going to respond to that. It's going to respond and start to release the other toxins that we're holding in our body, because that negative energy, that fear, whatever the feeling is that we rejected, not the emotion, but the feeling that we rejected from the experience, gets released. And that means that negative energy isn't there. And when that negative energy isn't there, what do you have left? You have pure divine light. You have pure source energy, pure God energy, and that heals. So your body, again, it's operating at a level. So that you see, this is a major deception that a lot of us have, that we have cleared something that we haven't actually cleared. This is a major deception and illusion that we hold on to, especially when we are moving through parts of our spiritual path in there. So when we stop holding on to that, the physical body can't hold on to the toxins it has, because it's being flooded with all this other light. And again, that's not just a visualization. That's not just a concept. That's not just words. That's something we have to feel within the cells of our body, within our hearts, as well as our mind and emotions in there. So, while intent is one thing, we still have to do the work in there. So we may find that those healings start to happen naturally if we have physical things that we deal with. And when we choose to clear things and we value the experiences that we've been through, instead of just seeing them as torment and trauma and pain and horrible stuff, we now step into the true divine euphoria. And that's where life really begins to get amazing. So I have gone on way longer than I thought. I know this is a big, huge topic to cover. Thanks a whole lot for sticking with me through this and for hanging in. As people like to say, you're giving a mini dissertation. I guess I do sometimes. When I get really, really inspired by something, I tend to do that, I guess. So I hope that this has been really helpful for you and really valuable for you, and given you some great things to think about. Hop over to my website, compassioncodes.com, should be in the link below, and you'll find a page that says goods, and you can look up the current year, pick up a copy for yourself. The ebook was recently reduced in price, so if you want the ebook version and you want to check that out, previous ebook versions are free. So if you want to check out how the book is written, the type of content, you can do that as well. The links are all there to get you directly to the pages on things. Hopefully I can revise up the website sometime this summer. And, and of course, I know, like and comment. I hate having to put those marketing things out there, but there's a reason for them. And I really would love to have my work reach more people. And when you like and you comment and you subscribe to the channel and all of those good things, it really helps me out, because it helps other people to see my work, and it helps other people to maybe get some help or some insight about something that they really need. And so it's not just about, following orders. There's actually physical algorithms that are at play, and it does make a huge difference. And, I don't have to be some huge celebrity, but I really would like to see the work get out there on a little bigger scale. And I'd really like to see it be where it can benefit a lot more people. So it does help me out from that sense. People are asking me, how can I help you out? That's it. Also in the the links at the bottom of the videos. I do have a donation link in there, and if you ever have any trouble with that, you can do it, and I do accept donations, and that allows me to keep my work scaled so that when people are in true suffering and true need, and they're trying to help themselves and they're in major struggles, it allows me to be there and to help it out, and it allows me to keep covering my time, like when I'm doing study sessions and things like that, and to just keep doing the work, keep doing the work and making it less about money. So the donations actually do that. Obviously, I have to charge for some things, but I try to keep certain core pieces available for free in the work, just because I think it's important, and I think it helps people, and people say it helps them, and I want to keep doing that. I want to keep helping people. And but I live in an earthly world. I do have expenses. I do need to have some food once in a while, and I do need to put a roof over my head at times. So um, even though I've adapted well in a lot of ways, that's very important to do. So with that, take care, everybody, and I will see you soon on the other side. Not sure when the next video will come out, since I'm putting this out now, but I guess we'll see how things flow and see what happens. And I promise it won't be as long as this one. Take care, and I'll see you soon.